Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday morning for your FreightWaves Now Community Spotlight. I'm Kaylee Nix. We're here with Mary O'Connell from the one and only Check Call newsletter. Mary, how's it going on this Tuesday morning?
It's not too bad. It's just planning how I'm going to have my tacos later today. As we know, it's Taco Tuesday. We celebrated very hard. And yeah, so other than that, it's been pretty okay. Pretty
It's like
okay.
9 a.m. Maybe it's time for me to go get a breakfast taco and ramp up my Taco Tuesday that way. Thoughts?
I love it. I mean, breakfast tacos are arguably one of the most underrated forms of tacos, right there up there with like an ice cream taco. So I say just commit to tacos all day long. Get some breakfast tacos, maybe get some nice street tacos for lunch, and then some white people tacos for dinner.
RIP Choco Taco circa 2023. Let's move into our guest for the day. We've got another great show on the way. Folks from Arriv Logistics joining us once again, this time not for their monthly update, but we are talking all about carrier strategy. And you've got Blair Blake, who is the Vice President of Carrier Strategy at Arriv, joining you today. A very underrated topic, in my opinion, for some of these logistics companies, because for some of them, their carrier strategy is simply just demand the most and don't expect anything else, right?
Yeah, that's unfortunately all too common in the freight broker and 3PL space. But yes, we have arrived back because they actually have done a pretty good job of maintaining and building a carrier, a good carrier base that they can rely on and everything like that. So I think that's something that is criminally underrated in a lot of other brokerages and 3PL spaces, is that, there's such a need to move freight quickly and to get things going and basically just hurry up and get all the loads booked and everything like that. And that's great. I'm not saying that you don't need to do that, but also something that other people forget is that, it's like you have all this rush to get things done and, I just need to get these carriers to do things. But those carrier relationships are who are going to bail you out in such a bad time. And so you'll have usually your handful of carriers that you can rely on to bail you out in a bad time. But it's also really important that you're more even on for those carriers that you are transactional with. You really want it to be a positive transaction on both ends. You want them to walk away saying, oh, I would work with you again. And you want to walk away going, oh, I would work with that carrier again. And ultimately that means setting everybody up for success and ideally thoroughly vetting your carriers to make sure that they are in fact real.
That's a really good point to bring up, because just because somebody is reliably there for you doesn't mean that they actually enjoy the interactions that they have and they actually see benefit out of the transaction outside of just a monetary aspect, right? Everybody likes the money that you bring in. But the reality is that the broker carrier space is still very, very emotionally transactional sometimes. And if you walk away from that transaction, whether it's a posted load or whether it's something that is a recurring lane that you bid on and you continually have with this one carrier, you can very quickly turn feelings of resentment into feelings of respect, right? And that has to do with some of this negotiation. Talk to me a little bit about how Arriv Logistics specifically, their strategy has kind of evolved with the changing market conditions. It's a lot more complicated than just like, we're nicer to our carriers now because we know that they're struggling.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, you still have to be in a place as an intermediary. You still need to be as a place to advocate for your shipper and advocate for your carrier. I know that 9 times out of 10, anytime something goes wrong, the first thing out of somebody's mouth is, "Oh, it's carrier's fault." Okay, well, 9 times. Also, sometimes it is the carrier's fault. Yes, they have made a mistake. People are human. Mistakes happen. But also, most of the time, it's not just immediately the carrier's fault. It could be the shipper's fault. It could be the broker's fault. It could be the carrier's fault. It could be a combination of all of those. And so it's really important before, if there's a mistake, to not just immediately blame it on your carrier and say, oh, it's their fault. Do just like 30 seconds of investigation and maybe talk to one other person and figure out what really happened. And then you have a clearer picture of what's going on. But ultimately, just because, like you mentioned, just because you do business with them and that you make money with them doesn't necessarily mean that that is a positive relationship. And sometimes when you have one of those negative relationships, people are like, oh, I'm never working with that person again because of this one time, this one instance. And it could have just been something as simple as a miscommunication. Like the broker thought something was on the BOL that wasn't, and then the shipper or the carrier said, well, you set me up for failure, and et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes those mistakes do happen, but you can also bounce back from those and still develop that working relationship with that carrier. It just means that, you have to be a lot more upfront and honest with them. So it's really important that you do kind of double check everything, even if it's a carrier that has run something forever, just run through that process again of like, this is what we expect from the shipper. These are the requirements. This is what you need. Because the one time you don't remind someone, oh, hey, you need to go get a washout before you pull up to the dock, they're going to forget and it's going to be a problem. So it's just something, it's just like the little details like that, that also, set everyone up for success. Because at the end of the day, everyone's here to move freight, make money, and ideally have no problems. But I mean, it's logistics, so there's going to be problems.
It's the classic case of two things can be true at the same time, right? Like, yeah, you know what? Your shipper didn't properly wrap this pallet, but also, I think that my driver took that turn just a little bit too fast. When it comes to brokers and brokerages specifically, I think there's often this bad rap of like, my broker's just out to squeeze as much money as possible out of this load. They're trying to screw over my carrier and they're trying to really just, I guess, squeeze the shipper on the tight side as well. But I think, lose a lot of the, I guess, respect is a good word for it, for the broker and like the actual difficulties of the job. Someone on LinkedIn is going to find this and go off on me about like a broker soliloquy and like, brokers are terrible people. They don't deserve your respect and condolences. We're not talking about that. It is in fact a difficult job. And for those good brokers who are out there and who are actually committed to taking care of their customer on the shipper and carrier side, it's tough work. And hey, you guys will make mistakes, but this is permission to like own those mistakes and know that it's not the end of the world, right?
It really is. And I mean, here's the thing. Everyone's going to make mistakes. It's just the sheer nature of the beast. I mean, I've seen where carriers have gotten loaded by a load that's not for them and realized it 100 miles away from the warehouse. Like, those things happen, and it's just one of those comically funny things. But one of the more important things is owning those mistakes. Like, if you have a shipper that finds out something is going to happen and you lied about it, or you hid it from them, then that immediately breaks that trust with that shipper. And that says, okay, well, what have we done that we haven't caught, that you've hid from us or that you've lied to us about? And that's going to cause that churn. The same thing with the carrier. If you know that this shipper is a pain in the butt to deal with, and you don't say like, hey, you're going to be here for a while. This shipper is notorious for long detention times. If you're not upfront, then you're going to damage that relationship with the carrier, because they're going to say, okay, well, one time, okay, but if it's happened more than once, like, well, you lied to me about these things. So what aren't you telling me? What is going to be a surprise on this load that you haven't told me about? And that means that me as a carrier is not going to want to work with that broker anymore. And that's where that animosity comes from, is that no one's ever really 100% honest with the other person. And honestly, like, why? It doesn't matter. We're all moving freight. There's not a secret sauce as to how one person moves freight differently than someone else. We're all moving stuff from point A to point B and trying to make margin off of it. So really kind of meeting your carriers where they at. And no matter how much technology you implement or try to do, you're only as strong as your weakest link, which a lot of carriers still love a good flip phone with the Nextel walkie-talkie. And it's also really important that, a lot of this is still relationship based. So if you have all of this technology to come through and do a lot of the back end stuff for you, that's amazing, because that gives you more time to sit there and talk to your carriers and build that relationship with them. So that way, when things happen, you can kind of fall back on that relationship and say, oh, it was an accident. Things happen. Let's move on past this.
Be a good person, take care of your people. Don't rely too heavily on technology unless it's extending your time to build those relationships. Mary, thanks for joining us this morning. Of course, we'll catch Check Call this afternoon right here on FreightWaves TV, and we will see you next week.
Bye, guys. Thank you.